Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. What if I offered a free lunch to every viewer of this program, and all you had to do was read 100 lines of Beowulf in the original Anglo-Saxon for me? Sound fair? Everyone has the same opportunity, right? Or do they? Our guests today will help us consider some new perspectives on fairness and justice. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Michelle Loyd-Paige, Dean of Multicultural Affairs at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She is also a preacher and lecturer who has lately been thinking about the terms equality and equity, which form our topic for today. Welcome, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
One little syllable's difference. The American ideal seems to be that everyone has equal opportunity, equal access to the same options and the same potential for success. But there are roadblocks sometimes to that equality, and that's where the difference between equity and equality come in, right?
Yes.
Can you give me an example of how that difference plays out, what that means?
I can give you a really good example of something that happened just earlier today. I was at lunch, and at the lunch they were serving everyone, and it was sandwiches and soup, which is fine, except I'm a vegetarian. Mm-hmm. And so when they said, well, here you can eat, well, there was nothing there for me to eat. Equality means that everybody had an opportunity to have lunch. Everyone could make their own super sandwich, but every item had meat in it, and so there was nothing there for me. Equity would have been if I could have something that didn't have meat in it.
Okay, so it has partly to do with the difference between measuring fairness in terms of opportunity versus maybe outcome?
Yes, opportunity and outcome. You can have equal access, but you might not have equal outcome. And I think that's sometimes where we have this tension about what is it that we really want. Mm-hmm. We like to think of ourselves as wanting equality, that everybody has the same place, everyone gets the same kind of rewards, mm-hmm. and we don't like to think of ourselves as really liking the idea of inequality, but I think deep down we do, and in some ways we even appreciate the inequality. If you are going to go to school, for example, my sister is a medical doctor, mm-hmm. and as she was going through school, taking all the exams, and all the classes and all the investment into that education, one of the things that she said as she neared the end of her residency is, I don't want anyone saying anything about how much money I'm making. I have earned this. Okay. Mm-hmm. And she says, don't I deserve more income or more prestige than someone
because you've worked harder to get to where you are.
Because they worked harder,
mm-hmm.
and
mm-hmm.
someone else dropped out of school and they were flipping burgers mm-hmm. Someplace. Don't I deserve more? And it's like, well, you have a good point. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways in our society, we do value inequality and we affirm inequality. But we value that, we can appreciate that when we think someone deserves it. Now, when we get to a situation where we think someone doesn't deserve it, we don't know quite what to do. We don't know what to do in terms of how do we think about ourselves being unequal. You know, we're both human, so right. Definitely we're both equal. So
difference equals inequality, or?
Sometimes difference is equated to inequality. Mm-hmm. And I think in how we are designed, how we're made, and the way that life shapes us, that there is inequality. And I think inequality is a part of creation. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people have brown skin, some people have white skin. So
diversity makes things interesting.
Diversity makes things interesting. It's the spice of life. But in that inequality, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. We can value the difference. And I think that's where we have some issues, is how do we value that difference that we see between one another?
So maybe equity is a way to get people to maybe their greatest place of potential, so that we can value our differences, because yes. we're all in places where that difference maybe a chosen difference or the best we
yeah,
can make it.
we're in different places, and I think we do ourselves a disservice if we think that everybody is in the same place, that everybody has the same opportunities. We don't have to look too far in our history and world history to know that we are not all shaped by the same social influences, by the same history.
We haven't all had the same opportunities.
We haven't all had the same opportunities, and those lack of opportunities have an accumulation effect. So it's not that, oh, well, you didn't go so far in school, and so that's just too bad for you. But no, my not going too far in school is going to affect my kids, it's going to affect their kids. And so there is a generational effect of inequality that we see. And when that inequality is structured within our society, within our social institutions, it's not just an easy remedy to say, okay, now do better.
We'll start from scratch.
Yeah, we'll start from scratch. The laws are changed. It's illegal for you to discriminate against me now, so now I can just go out and do all the things that you can do. That's not necessarily the case.
To clarify the difference between then the idea of equity and equality, the analogy of leveling the playing field is used a lot to describe what we would talk about as equity. That is creating a level starting point for people. As we talked earlier, you described, you used the analogy of a racetrack, a running racetrack, and for longer races, the start lines are staggered around the circle, which always as a kid I thought looked sort of unfair. I would rather be in that outer lane that's farthest up. But in fact, when we measure the distance, that staggered start time gives us equal distance ultimately, right? So that would be a sort of equity. Equality would be starting at the same line. Equity would be creating differing starting points so that we have the equal opportunity to finish at the same place.
Right.
Still doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to tie in the race.
That's correct. That's where the problem lies.
Right.
Is that when it seems like I'm okay with you having more as long as I'm not feeling I have less.
Okay.
And that's where I think we are in many places in our societies, whether it's in large institutions or sibling rivalry. I'm okay with my little sister getting more as long as it doesn't feel like I'm getting less. And I think, unfortunately, the language that's used to describe whether we're talking in the workplace or we're talking in the home or we're talking in the court system or wherever place we might be talking about, it's always framed as a well, they have more than they deserve, and therefore I'm going to have less.
It's a zero sum.
It's a zero sum,
situation.
and I'm not convinced that it's a zero sum situation.
There could be more for everyone.
There could be more for everyone.
We could take this into the arena of racial discrimination, of gender discrimination, probably of age discrimination. I mean, I was thinking to play this out. Yeah, disabilities. Should I, if I'm in a wheelchair, should I have as much access to the movie theater or whatever? But then I was thinking there are probably limits to that. Should I have? I'm not very coordinated. Should I have the right to compete in the Olympics? Or are there areas where I simply should accept my inherent limitations and go seek things that I can do better at? I'm probably never going to win the Olympics.
And I think that's where we need to be able to say, you know what, there are differences, and we need to celebrate those differences. Now, in competitions, you know, I would love it if I could win American Idol. I will never win
Me too.
American Idol. I would be on the goofy tape. It's like, oh, can you believe that she actually tried out to sing for this? So I think in those areas it's fine. Yeah. And in those situations, I'm not feeling like something is missing from me. I can see.
It's not a basic right.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you are better than me, and I would much rather hear the winner of American Idol than myself sing. So we can appreciate that. Yeah. But it's when it comes to those times where I can't really see the difference, or I don't understand. Now, I can understand a singing ability or being able to run or jump, that might be a gift that someone has, an extraordinary talent. And I can see I don't have that extraordinary talent. But when I think that maybe it's something that is within your control, well, why didn't you go to school longer? And why are you choosing to live in that neighborhood? And why don't you just go fill out an application to go get a job?
Right.
It's your choice. So when I feel like maybe it has something to do with you or the individual, then I get upset. So why are you getting more money than me?
Or why do you, because you start with...
Yeah, you start with an assumption that we're all the same, that we've all had the same experience. And also we have to look at not only at our assumptions about how we get to the starting line, but we also have to look at our assumptions. What is the ending line?
Sure.
What is the goal? What are we looking for? It could be...
So you were looking for lunch today.
I
just wanted to be fed.
Today. I just wanted to be fed, you know. But and the people didn't even think about, and which is usual. I half expected it wherever I go. But it wasn't even on their radar, and that's what happens to us if we're not in a position where we have to question what we're expecting. Usually the norm when people go out to lunch or wherever, they're expecting there's going to be something. There's going to be a red meat, there's going to be a white meat, they'll be able to eat something. And it's not even on radar because we're in such a meat-driven society that someone might not
Well,
eat.
and maybe that's it, is that if I only socialize with meat eaters, I don't think about it.
No, you don't think about it.
The same discrimination against tea drinkers.
I know.
Right?
I said if I ever have a restaurant, I will serve tea, and when someone asks for coffee, I'll say,
Make a
well,
fuss
let me
about
see
having
if
to
I
make
can
it.
Find
Yes,
some coffee somewhere.
Well, and I read a little piece recently about a doctor saying, I treat all my patients equally. I treat all my patients the same. And the response to that was, no, in fact, you privilege the patients who are the most like you, who relate most to your temperament and your ways of understanding the world. And probably much discrimination takes place not because we're intentionally discriminating, but because we're not aware of different needs.
I think a lot of discrimination happens unintentionally. It's just not even on our radar, and we don't like to think of ourselves as treating people differently.
Well, no.
I mean, if we ask ourselves, if you ask anyone, are you a racist, a sexist, an ableist, or whatever? I say, no, I treat everybody the same, and I love everyone.
Which means I treat everyone as if they were me.
Yes. And then you start to question, well, who's in your circle? Who are the people that you interact with? Who are people that you think are most like you? When do you notice difference? When they start looking at their close circle, they usually realize that they are surrounded by people who look a lot like them, who act a lot like them, or think the same way that they do. So they're not forced to think about, what if I was different? And how would my needs be met in this situation? And again, it goes back to, what are we expecting? What are we looking for? What is our desired outcome? I think some of the issues would be solved if we just were honest about what our outcomes. If we say, you know what, I like inequality, and this is the way that it wants. This is the way that it's going to be and happen.
And there certainly are people. I mean, when I think about gender discrimination, there are people who simply say, no, it's very clear that women and men are expected to occupy different roles in society. Or that
but if we say that they can occupy the same roles, then we have to look at, well, how are we saying that that's the truth?
And what is there? I mean, this is probably a trivial example, but I read another little piece about somebody talking about bathrooms, men's and women's restrooms, right? You and I both know that women need, for whatever reason, lots more bathroom stalls than men do, and that in a big crowd, the women will take over the men's room too and guard it at the front. Is it fair? Is it justice to say, no, 5 stalls for the men, 5 stalls for the women, duke it out? Or is it justice to say, let's make sure everybody has enough access to the facilities?
Again, you have to look at, what is it that you want. If you want to have happy women, if efficiency is the goal, then we need to have more bathroom stalls for women.
I imagine most of us, when we think about fairness and justice, think in terms of equality rather than equity. Is it just because it's simpler?
I think it's simpler, and because we can measure equality much easier than we can measure equity. I mean, if we're going to measure equality, we can just do the little tick marks. Okay, 5 stalls, 5 stalls, that's fine. We don't have to think about anything else and feel like we've done our job. And then you also have to look at, who is it that's creating the bathroom stalls, all right? So in that case, this particular case, it's likely men, and they're thinking, well, I'm going to be fair. I am considerate to women. They have the same amount of stalls as I do. Well, they're not. They don't usually think about.
And they've never stood in line outside the ladies' room.
outside the ladies' room.
It means everybody has enough.
Equity means everybody
But
has
enough might not be the same for
But
everyone.
enough might not be the same for everyone.
Okay.
If we go back to food, and we'll talk about dinner.
Yeah.
When I prepare food for, when my kids were quite small and we're making dinner, husband gets a much bigger portion.
Yes.
And the kids got a smaller
And
portion.
kids understand that.
And
I
they
always
understand
did.
that. And and maybe they would rather have the chicken fries as opposed to the gourmet meal that's prepared for husband and wife being prepared. And but now that they're all young adults, Papa and Mama have the smaller portion, and the kids have the huge portion. That's equity.
That's what they need.
And that's fair. Their metabolism is raging, they're growing, they're more active, they need more calories. Now, we all need a certain amount of calories just to survive. And I would imagine that we could all live on the same amount of calories. Some would do better than others if we just went it according to body height.
Well,
stuff,
but even then, right, size differentials.
Size differentials, but we get if we go into some other area, we can understand it for food. We have the happy meals and those for smaller appetites. But when we go into another arena, we begin to think something might be taken away from me. So if my goal is to say diversify a workplace, and I'd like to see more women in the workplace, so maybe I'll give a nod to a qualified female candidate. So because the goal is to diversify, but sometimes we get uncomfortable, think, well, are we being fair? Well, you have to understand why do we have this imbalance in the first place? So if we recognize the causes of the inequality, and if our purpose is to address those causes of inequality, as well as to do something with the outcome, we have to be willing to be satisfied, or at least to be comfortable to some extent with some temporary inequality. And that sometimes is difficult for people to say, is it okay to be unequal? Is it okay to notice difference?
Well, and then there are all these questions about pride and dignity and so forth, that if I'm getting a handout, or if I'm getting a leg up, or if I get a job because I know somebody or because somebody feels sorry for me, is that really fair? And in the long run, does that harm me? I got a job as a college student because my dad knew somebody who who in conversation found out I was an English major and wondered if I'd like to do some writing. And I felt a bit guilty about that. And somebody finally said, yes, but if you can't do the writing, you're not going to keep that job.
Right. Well, long time ago, when I was in high school, graduating from high school, I was at a major retail store, and someone asked if I would apply to be a cashier. They knew I was going to college and thought, okay, she must be able to think and write at the same time. And I said yes. And when I asked why did they ask me, they said, well, we're trying to diversify, and we need more ethnic minorities. And so would you be willing to do that? And for me at that moment, I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And I knew the reason why I was being asked. I knew the reason why should I get the job, and I did, why I would have the job. And for me, it was fine. It wasn't an attack on my pride or my dignity. For me, it was understanding that this particular company had a poor record in diversifying. They were trying to diversify.
So you could help redress a problem.
So I could help redress the problem.
And you would still have to, it gives you the opportunity to prove that you can do what you...
I still had to do the work. Ended up being cashier of the year a couple of times, so I could still do the work. But if they weren't sensitive that there was something wrong with the way they had been recruiting people or employing people, if they weren't cognizant of how that inequality had been built in, they would have never sought particularly to attract people of color into their organization. But because they recognized the cause of the inequality, they sought a way to address it. And because I was fortunate enough to be able to help them address that, then it was fine. Then I'm understanding what the big picture is.
Were they, we had an interview recently with Ron Jimerson, who talked about providing some job opportunities to homeless people locally. And he had tried with an organization, I think 3 times. The first time, the homeless people all took the jobs, and I think within 2 weeks they'd all dropped out. And he tried it again later. And what happened ultimately, they've developed a successful program, but what was going on was that the easy, obvious first step was, let's offer jobs to these people. But what they weren't yet considering was what sorts of accommodations the people would need to help them make the transition so that they could be successful. And so they got better and better at accommodating those needs. And what impressed me in hearing that interview was how willing the company was to keep plugging away at making this work. How do you, that's where the things get difficult in terms of all fields. Again, racial inequities, gender inequities, disability inequities. How much do you give? How much accommodation? I mean, to go back to what you said about people feeling that something's being taken away from them.
And again, that goes back to asking the question, what is our desired outcome? Now, you have to build some agreement, and if you have a strong leader who's talking about this is the outcome that we want, and I think with Jimerson's example, it was the leader of the head of the organization that this is what we want to do, and so we'll have to do the hard. We'll have to do the hard things in order to make that happen. And change is not always easy. And what I appreciate about the work that they've done at Cascade Engineering is that they have looked at people, they've tried, and they've given them some extra help. So it wasn't, okay, here's a job application, and now
you've got an equal opportunity.
You've got an equal opportunity. They've noticed that perhaps they'll need some extra training and just even a different understanding of how to work and how you do that work in order to help them. And I think that's one way of addressing it, because we do have to address individual shortcomings. And that's something that a organization can do, a private business can do. Then another step would be, then what would our society or what would our community, I mean, what would it look like if our community said, we want to get rid of homelessness? So would that mean we'd need to build houses that people could actually afford? Does that mean we might have to lower the mortgage rate, or say, or give have lower payments, different percentage, or maybe no interest at all, maybe a no interest loan? So that
that's not fair to those of us who are paying interest.
I know, so it could get them in. You know, And I think if we are understanding what is the outcome, and if we could build an understanding that it's not taking away from you, but it's a part of building community, we'd have better buy-in.
I do, to back up to that, Habitat does the sweat equity thing. You might not have money to put in, so you're going to put in some time, some hours, and you're going to help out with some other homes as well to earn your own. And that seems to be a sort of equitable thing of let's look at what each individual has to contribute to the project, and it might not always be money, or it might not always be education or whatever.
And also, I think we need to think about what privilege do we have? And we don't like to think of ourselves as having more privilege, or we always talk about the underprivileged. We never talk about the overprivileged.
Well, we deserve our privileges.
I'm the overprivileged. I worked hard for this. I'm not overprivileged. I just paid my dues. But this little while ago, some months ago, I was in South Africa, and in South Africa I was with a group, and we were buying some jewelry from individuals. And when we got back, there were some people in our group who were bragging about how much they had bartered down, you know, way, way down. And I lost it in that conversation. I said, how can you be proud of bartering down, getting the low, you know, really low price?
You could have easily paid
when you
full
could have
price.
easily paid, and you know that this group of people, that they're depending on tourist dollars to survive. I said, you know what? I know I overpaid. I know that I paid more than what someone who might have been local or someone else, and I'm happy to have done it, because in some ways I'm feeling I'm contributing to their livelihood, and I want them to feel better. They may feel they've gotten over on me, and that's fine.
Feeling to feel that you've helped someone and gotten some profit from it.
And for me, that was a way of restitution, reconciliation, justice, my own little bit to play in this part of social justice. Here we are in the United States, and we have all of this immense resources and power. And here's some of my brothers and sisters in South Africa that do not have that access or benefit, and some of the things that we do have a negative impact on them. So this was my small way. So yes, let me pay the first price that you offer, instead of trying to barter you all the way down to something that's
What's hardest for you about trying to promote this idea of equity? You've gotten some resistance.
I've gotten some resistance, and one of the hardest things about promoting this is getting people comfortable with the idea that we can notice difference, and that we actually like inequality, because if you can recognize one that...
And you're saying that's okay, right?
I'm saying that's okay. I'm saying that's okay. And when I look at creation, inequality is all over the place.
Ultimately, equity is about making sure everyone has enough, everyone has what they need.
Ultimately, that's what equity is about. Everyone has what they need, and that's what community, true community, is all about, is everyone has what they need. We have to ask ourselves, having a winter house and a summer house is fun, but
do you need them both?
But do you need both, especially when you know someone just down the street has no house?
Have either.
Then we need to relook at what do we mean by community.
Okay.
And if the community that we want, the community that I want, everybody has what they need. I just gave away my coat, a long wool coat, because there was someone that I was having a conversation with, and they didn't have a coat. And I said, okay, I've got 4 or 5 coats at home. How can I go back home and look in my closet and see these 4 or 5 coats, put it up, oh, well, it's not Sunday, so I'm not going to wear it today. And I know that winter is coming and you don't have a coat. Here, take my coat. Yes, it is nice. Yes, it is nice. I do like it, but I want you to have it because I can't look at myself in the mirror knowing that you don't have a coat and I have more coats than I need.
I think equity would give us 45 minutes for this show instead of half an hour, but we'll call it a day. Thank you so much, Michelle. My guest today has been Michelle Loyd-Paige, Dean of Multicultural Affairs at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.